Hello everyone. Welcome to my channel. Have a good day.
When Derek called that Tuesday morning, his first words made my blood run cold. "Michael, you're dead." I almost laughed, but something in his voice told me he wasn't joking. And as I realized what he meant, I understood this was only the beginning of something horrifying. My name is Michael Patterson, and on this Tuesday morning, I was living what I thought was a quiet, unremarkable life. I didn't know that by the end of the day. Everything I thought I knew would be a lie. I'm 54 years old. I spent 25 years as a cop in this city before I hung it up. The badge didn't make me rich. It didn't give me much except a bad back, worse insomnia, and a lot of memories I'd rather forget. These days, I manage human resources for an insurance company. It's not glamorous. It's not fulfilling. But it pays the bills. And after everything I've seen in law enforcement, normal feels like a blessing. I live alone in a 3-bedroom house in the suburbs. My ex-wives are long gone. My daughter Sarah is the only thing in my life that still matters. She's 28 years old, beautiful, and she's been with her boyfriend Derek for the last 4 years. Sarah means everything to me. We talk every week. We have dinner together at least twice a month. She's the light in my world. The reason I get up in the morning. The reason I didn't completely fall apart after the divorces. And then there's Derek. I've never liked him. I know that's what fathers say about their daughters' boyfriends sometimes. We're protective. We're suspicious. But this was different. Derek was charming enough on the surface. He had a good job in finance. He said all the right things. He took Sarah to nice restaurants. He bought her flowers. But there was something underneath all of that. Something I couldn't quite name. Maybe it was the way his smile never quite reached his eyes. Maybe it was the way he touched Sarah's arm just a little too firmly when she laughed at something he didn't find funny. Or maybe it was just a father's instinct, that ancient warning system that tells you when something isn't right. That Tuesday morning started like any other. I woke up at 5:30 in the morning. The sun wasn't up yet. I made myself a cup of coffee and sat at the kitchen table reading the news on my phone. My back was killing me. The arthritis in my shoulders had been acting up. I was thinking about calling my doctor when my phone rang. It was a number I didn't recognize. I almost didn't answer it. But something made me pick up. Some instinct. Some voice inside my head that said this call was important. Mr. Patterson. The voice belonged to Derek. His tone was calm and controlled. But there was something underneath it. Something that wasn't quite right. "Derek, why are you calling from a different number? I'm calling from the hospital," he said. "There's been an accident. A car accident. I'm sorry to tell you this over the phone, but your daughter's father was in a very bad crash. I'm afraid he didn't survive." I went completely cold. My mind struggled to catch up with what I was hearing. "Derek, I'm standing in my kitchen right now. I'm alive." There was a pause, just long enough for my cop's instinct to start firing off alarms in my head. "That doesn't make sense," Derek said. His voice had tightened slightly. "The hospital said they had a John Michael Patterson in intensive care. He came in this morning after a terrible accident. They told me he didn't make it. He's gone." "I'm right here," I said. "Derek, where is Sarah? Let me talk to her." "Sarah is here at the hospital with me. She's very upset about all of this. I told her I would call you, and I wasn't sure what to say. This is very difficult." I didn't believe him. My entire career in law enforcement had been built on my ability to read people, to hear the lies underneath their words. And Derek was lying. I could hear it in the way he paused. I could hear it in the careful way he was choosing his words. Derek, I need you to put Sarah on the phone right now. She's in the bathroom. She's completely distraught. She's been crying for the last hour. But Mr. Patterson, there's something we need to discuss. The hospital is asking about insurance. They're asking about your will. They're asking about your bank accounts. They're saying we need to get those things sorted out right away because of Sarah's situation. There it was. The real reason for the call. Not sympathy, not concern. Not a son-in-law worried about his girlfriend's father. Money. Pure and simple. Derek, I said, keeping my voice level. I don't know what kind of game you're playing, but I assure you I'm alive and well. I want to talk to my daughter right now. Put her on the phone. I don't think that's going to be possible, Derek said. And I heard something in his voice that made my blood turn to ice. It was the sound of someone who had just realized his plan wasn't going to work. It was the sound of a man calculating his next move, deciding how to proceed now that his first play had failed. Derek, I started, but he had already hung up. I stood there in my kitchen for what felt like an eternity. The coffee in my hand had gone cold. My mind was racing through possibilities, each one worse than the last. Derek had called me to tell me I was dead. He had tried to convince me that I needed to give him access to my assets. And he had my daughter, my Sarah. That's when I made a decision that would change everything. I decided not to call the police. Not yet. I needed to figure out what was really going on before I brought in the authorities. I was a cop once. I knew how the system worked. I knew how long things took. And I knew that Derek had just made a terrible mistake. He had looked at me and seen a broken old man living alone on a cop's pension. He had no idea what he was dealing with. I hung up the phone and stood in my kitchen for a long time without moving. The house was silent except for the hum of the refrigerator and the distant sound of traffic outside. My mind was working through what had just happened, piece by piece, like a detective reconstructing a crime scene. Derek had called me on a number that wasn't his. He had told me I was dead. He had mentioned Sarah. And then, most importantly, he had asked for access to my bank accounts. In my 25 years as a cop, I learned one fundamental truth about human nature. When someone goes to the trouble of lying to you, they want something. And when they want something that badly, they usually make mistakes. Derek had made his first mistake by calling me at all. He had made his second mistake by trying to convince me I was dead. And he had made his third mistake by hanging up when I refused to cooperate. I walked upstairs to my bedroom and opened the closet. On the top shelf, behind some old boxes, I found what I was looking for. A laptop that I hadn't used in 3 years. An old investigator's notebook from my days on the force. A digital camera. These were the tools of my trade. I had hung up the badge, but I had never hung up the skills. A cop doesn't just stop being a cop. The training becomes part of you. The way of thinking becomes wired into your brain. I sat down at my desk and turned on the laptop. While I waited for it to boot up, I thought about Derek, what I knew about him, what I had observed over the 4 years he had been dating my daughter. He worked in finance. He made good money. He was always well dressed. He had a nice car, a nice apartment. But there was something off about the way he lived. He never seemed to have any friends. He didn't talk about his family. When Sarah mentioned wanting to spend time with his parents, he always changed the subject. He told her they were difficult people. He told her they didn't understand him. These were red flags, small ones. but red flags nonetheless. The laptop came to life. I logged in and opened a browser. I started searching. Derek Watson, finance, 31 years old, born in Birmingham, Alabama. I found a LinkedIn profile. I found some professional pages. I found his current address listed on a property tax website. But what I was really looking for was his past. Where had he come from? Where had he worked before? Who had he been involved with? That was when I decided to do something I shouldn't have done. I decided to investigate Derek on my own before I called the police. I had good reasons. I knew how slow the system could move. I knew how easily people could disappear if they panicked. And I knew that if Derek really had Sarah, if he was really holding her somewhere, then every hour mattered. Every minute counted. I couldn't afford to wait for the police to do their job at their own pace. I pulled out my old notebook and started writing down everything I knew about Derek. His job, his address, his phone number, his birthday, his habits, the places he and Sarah had gone on dates, the restaurants he liked, the coffee shops he visited. I was building a picture of the man, and the more I wrote down, the more unsettled I became. I spent the next 2 hours going through my house systematically. I wasn't sure what I was looking for, but my instinct told me that if Derek had been planning something like this, if he had been planning to frame me for my own death and steal my assets, then he would have needed access to my home. He would have needed to plant something. He would have needed to gather information. I started in the bedroom. I checked the windows. I checked the locks. I checked the closet. I checked under the bed. Then I moved to the kitchen. I checked the drawers. I checked the cabinets. I checked everywhere someone could possibly hide something. The living room came next, then the bathroom, then the guest bedroom. By the time I got to my own bedroom again, I was starting to think maybe I was wrong. Maybe I was being paranoid. Maybe Derek had just made a prank call. Maybe this was all some kind of misunderstanding. And then I found it. I was standing in my bedroom, looking at the smoke detector on the ceiling. We all have them. We barely notice them. They're just part of the landscape of our homes. But something about this one looked slightly different from the others. It looked newer. It looked like it had been installed more recently than the one in the hallway. I pulled my desk chair over and climbed up. I reached up and unscrewed the smoke detector from the ceiling. And when I looked inside, my blood turned to ice. Hidden inside the detector, carefully wedged behind the actual smoke detection mechanism, was a small black object, a camera, a lens, a device designed to watch everything that happened in my bedroom. I stood there on that chair, holding that camera in my hand, and I realized something that changed everything. Derek hadn't just planned to rob me. Derek hadn't just planned to frame me. Derek had been watching me. He had been watching my home. He had been watching my life. And I had no idea how long he had been doing it, or what else he might have found. I climbed down from the chair slowly. I placed the camera on my desk, and I made a promise to myself right then. I was going to find out everything. I was going to uncover every secret. And when I was done, Derek was going to regret the day he ever decided to cross me. I found 7 more devices. 7. Each one carefully hidden. Each one tracking something different. My hands were shaking as I went through my house with new eyes, looking at everything as if I had never seen it before. The camera and the smoke detector had been just the beginning. Derek hadn't hidden his surveillance in one place. He had distributed it throughout my home like a predator marking his territory. The second device was in the alarm clock on my nightstand. I opened it up and found a small listening device, no bigger than a dime. The third was in the picture frame on my dresser. A tiny lens pointed directly at my bed. The fourth was hidden in the air vent in my bathroom. The fifth was inside the base of my bedroom lamp. The sixth was tucked behind the outlet cover in the hallway. The seventh was in the refrigerator, disguised as a light sensor. I laid all 7 devices out on my kitchen table. Each one was expensive. Each one was professional grade. This wasn't something Derek had ordered from the internet. This was something he had planned carefully. This was something he had invested significant time and money into. The realization hit me like a punch to the stomach. Derek hadn't just decided one day to target me. He had been preparing for this for months. I thought about calling the police. I should have called the police, but I didn't. Instead, I turned my attention to my daughter's car. Sarah drove a 2018 Honda Accord. She had inherited it from her mother after the second divorce. I knew where she parked it most of the time. At Derek's apartment, I went to Derek's building and found her car in the underground parking garage. It took me 15 minutes to find the GPS tracker. It was attached to the undercarriage of her vehicle with a strong magnet. It was a tracky device, professional, reliable, constantly sending location data to whoever owned the account. Whoever could log in and see exactly where my daughter had been, where she was right now, and where she was going. I took the device with me. Back at home, I sat at my desk and thought about what to do next. Derek had cameras in my bedroom. He had listening devices throughout my house. He had a GPS tracker on my daughter's car. What else was he watching? What else did he know? That's when I decided to call my bank. I dialed the number on the back of my credit card. I went through the security questions: name, date of birth, mother's maiden name. The representative answered on the third ring. His name was David. He had a pleasant voice and a helpful attitude. "I need to check something about my account," I said. "Has anyone besides me accessed my accounts in the last few months? I'm concerned about potential fraud." There was a pause while he typed something into his computer. "Well, Mr. Patterson, I do see that there have been several online accesses to your account from a location we haven't seen before. Let me check the details." Another pause. "I see here that someone logged in from an IP address in the downtown area multiple times over the last 8 months. They accessed your account information. They viewed your bank balances. They looked at your investment portfolio." "Did they transfer any money?" I asked. My voice was calm, but my mind was racing. "No, sir. It doesn't look like they made any transfers, but they did access your account. This could be a security concern. Would you like us to reset your password and put a fraud alert on your account?" "Yes," I said. "Please do that immediately. And can you tell me if anyone else has access to my accounts? Anyone with power of attorney? Anyone I might have given authorization to? Let me check that for you." "Sir." More typing. "I see here that Sarah Patterson has been added as an authorized user on one of your accounts. The checking account. When was that added?" I felt my stomach drop. "I didn't authorize that. Someone else must have done it." "It shows here that it was authorized online 7 months ago. The authorization came from this number." "Your number? That's not possible," I said. "I didn't do that." "Well, sir, the system shows that someone logged in with your credentials and added her as an authorized user. This would have required access to your password and your security questions. Do you think your credentials might have been compromised?" "Yes," I said. "I think they have been." I think someone accessed my passwords and my security information. I need to lock everything down. After I got off the phone with the bank, I sat at my kitchen table and stared at those 7 devices again. Derek had done this. He had taken my passwords. He had accessed my accounts. He had added my daughter as an authorized user so he could access my money through her. He had planted cameras throughout my house. He had tracked her location. He had built a web of control so intricate and so comprehensive that I almost didn't understand the scope of it until I saw it all laid out in front of me. This wasn't a robbery. This was a cage. A prison that Derek had been constructing around both of us for the last 8 months. And I was just now beginning to understand how long he had been planning this, how deep his betrayal went, how many lies he had told, how many ways he had woven himself into our lives so that when he finally made his move, we would have nowhere to run. I picked up one of the cameras and turned it over in my hands. And I made a decision that would change the course of everything that was about to happen. I was going to call my daughter, and I was going to do it carefully. Very carefully. My hands were shaking as I poured a drink I couldn't taste. The cameras, the GPS trackers, the financial control, the added authorization on my bank accounts. It all painted a picture of something far worse than I had imagined. This wasn't just a con artist. This wasn't just a predator. This was someone who had spent months building a cage around my daughter. And I had been so blind that I hadn't even seen the bars going up. I needed to talk to Sarah, but I couldn't just call her on the phone and ask her questions. Derek was probably with her. He was probably listening. He was probably the one who had answered when I called earlier. So I did something I hadn't done in years. I went to the store and bought a prepaid cell phone, a burner phone, a phone that Derek wouldn't know about and couldn't trace. It was 7 o'clock in the evening when I called Sarah's number from the new phone. She answered on the second ring. Her voice was small and frightened. "Hello," she said. "Sarah, it's Dad. Don't say anything. Don't react. Just listen to me. Is Derek there?" There was a pause. I could hear her breathing. "Yes," she said quietly. "Is he in the room with you right now?" "Yes." "Okay. I need you to tell me if you're safe, but you can't say it directly. So I'm going to ask you some questions, and you just answer them like you normally would. Understand?" "Okay." "Dad, are you hurt?" I asked. There was another pause. A long one. "Not right now," she said. The words hit me like a physical blow. Not right now. That meant there had been times when she was hurt. Times when someone had hurt her. Times when she had been in pain. "Has Derek ever hurt you?" I asked. My voice was steady, but my mind was screaming. "I don't want to talk about that," Sarah said. And I could hear the fear in her voice. I could hear the way she was keeping her voice low so Derek couldn't hear her clearly. "Sarah, I know something is wrong. I know Derek called me this morning and told me I was dead. I know he's been tracking you. I know he's been in my house. I know he's been listening and watching. I need you to tell me the truth." "I can't," Sarah whispered. "Yes, you can. I'm listening. I'm here. I'm not going anywhere. Tell me what happened." There was a sound in the background, Derek's voice. Sarah said something I couldn't hear. Then there was silence for a moment. "I'm sorry. Dad," Sarah said. "I can't talk about this right now." "Sarah, wait. Just answer one question for me. Are you pregnant?" The line went quiet. So quiet that I thought she might have hung up. But she was still there. I could hear her breathing. I was she said finally. Her voice broke. But I'm not anymore. My blood turned to ice. What do you mean you were? Sarah's voice dropped to barely above a whisper. When Derek found out I was pregnant, he said we didn't have enough money for 3 people. He said the infrastructure wasn't there yet. He said we needed to wait. But I wanted to have the baby. Dad, I wanted to have your grandchild. Sarah, he made me go to a clinic. He drove me there. He said if I didn't do it, he would leave me. He said he would take all my money and disappear. He said nobody would believe me if I tried to tell anyone. He said he would make sure I never saw you again. I felt rage rising in my chest. Pure, primal rage. The kind of rage that makes you want to destroy things. The kind of rage that makes you want to kill. Did he hurt you? I asked again. Not then, Sarah said. But after, when I was upset about what happened, he said I was being dramatic. He said I was being selfish. He said I should be grateful that he was taking care of me. And when I cried, he told me to stop. And when I didn't stop, She didn't finish the sentence. She didn't need to. He hit you. I said. It wasn't a question, just once, Sarah said. But he said next time would be worse if I didn't learn to control my emotions. He said he was trying to help me. He said he was teaching me. I wanted to scream. I wanted to drive to Derek's apartment right now and do things to him that would land me back in prison. But I couldn't. Sarah needed me to be smart. Sarah needed me to be strategic. Sarah needed me to be the man I used to be. The detective. The investigator. The one who could think clearly when everything else was falling apart. Sarah, listen to me. I need you to stay calm. I need you to act normal around Derek. Can you do that? I think so, she said. Good. Because I'm going to fix this. I'm going to figure out what he's done, and I'm going to make sure he pays for it. But I need time. And I need you to be safe while I do that. So you're going to go to bed tonight. And tomorrow you're going to wake up and go about your day like nothing is wrong. Understand? Okay, Sarah said. I love you, baby. I'm going to get you out of this. I hung up before she could respond, before Derek could start suspecting something. And I sat there in my house with all those surveillance devices spread out in front of me. And I made a promise. I was going to destroy Derek Watson. Not just arrest him, not just expose him, but destroy him completely. I was going to find out every terrible thing he had ever done, and I was going to make sure he never hurt anyone ever again. I spent that entire night making a decision. Sarah needed me to be strategic, not emotional. So I decided to investigate deeper. I decided to find out if this was Derek's first hunt, or just his most recent one. I sat at my kitchen table with my old notebook and started writing down everything I knew. Every piece of information, every detail, every timeline. Derek had been dating Sarah for 4 years. But the surveillance devices I had found in my house, they had been professionally installed. That meant they had been installed sometime in the last year, maybe longer. That meant Derek had been planning this for months. Months of preparation. The camera in the smoke detector, the listening devices, the GPS tracker, all of it pointed to months of careful, methodical planning, which meant that Derek had known exactly what he was doing from the very beginning, which meant that this wasn't his first time. I called the police department the next morning. I asked to speak to a detective. I was transferred to someone named Detective James Morrison. He had a gruff voice and the tone of someone who had heard a lot of stories and believed very few of them. I need to report a crime, I said. I believe someone is planning to commit fraud against me. I also believe this person is being abusive toward my daughter. What's your daughter's name? Detective Morrison asked. Sarah Patterson. And what's the name of the person you're accusing? Derek Watson. He's 29 years old. He works in finance, and he's been surveilling me. I heard the skepticism in Morrison's voice when he spoke again. Mr. Patterson, do you have any proof of this? Yes, I said. I have 7 surveillance devices that I found in my house. I have a GPS tracker that was attached to my daughter's car. I have evidence of unauthorized access to my bank accounts. Have you filed a report about the surveillance devices? Morrison asked. No. I'm filing it now. I'm calling you. Okay. I'm going to need you to bring those devices into the station so we can have them examined. I'm also going to need you to bring any documentation related to the bank account access. In the meantime, I would recommend changing your passwords and alerting your bank about the unauthorized access. What about my daughter? I asked. She's in danger. Is she in immediate danger? Morrison asked. I don't know, I admitted. But Derek called me and told me I was dead. He tried to get me to give him access to my assets, and my daughter has indicated that he's been abusive toward her. Has she filed a complaint? Not yet. Has she been to a hospital? Has she received medical treatment for her injuries? Not that I know of. Then at this point, Mr. Patterson, I don't have enough to arrest him, but I can certainly open an investigation. I'm going to need you to bring in those devices, and I'm going to recommend that your daughter call us if she feels she's in immediate danger. After I hung up with the detective, I realized something that made my stomach sink. The police moved slowly. The police required paperwork. The police needed evidence that could hold up in court. But Derek was moving fast. Derek was not constrained by the legal system. Derek could hurt Sarah. Derek could run. Derek could disappear. And by the time the police had built their case, it might be too late. So I made a decision. I was going to do this myself first. I was going to investigate Derek on my own. I was going to find out everything about him. And then, when I had enough to destroy him completely, I would hand it all over to the police. I spent the entire day building a timeline. I wrote down the date that Sarah had first mentioned Derek at a family dinner. I wrote down the date that they had moved in together. I wrote down the date that Derek had asked to borrow money from Sarah. I wrote down every financial transaction I could find that involved both of them. I was looking for patterns. I was looking for the moment when Derek had decided to target my daughter. And the more I wrote, the more I understood that this had been planned from the very beginning, from the moment he had met her. And then I started looking into Derek's past. I searched for him online. I looked at property records. I looked at court documents. I looked at anything I could find, and what I discovered made my blood run cold. Derek Watson had lived in 4 different cities in the last 5 years. He had worked for 3 different financial firms. He had moved every time his employment seemed to be ending, and each time he had moved, there had been a woman involved, a woman who had reported him to her company, a woman who had accused him of something. But those accusations had always been dropped. The women had always backed down, or they had moved away, or they had simply disappeared from the internet entirely. But there was one name that kept coming up in my searches, one name that wouldn't go away: Jessica Martinez. She had lived in Birmingham, Alabama. She had worked in finance like Derek, and 3 years ago, she had died in a car accident. I stared at that name on my computer screen for a long time. Jessica Martinez. A woman Derek had known. A woman who had died under circumstances that suddenly seemed far less accidental to me now. I needed to know more about Jessica. I needed to know if there was any connection between her death and Derek Watson's presence in her life. I picked up my phone and dialed information for Birmingham, Alabama. I asked for the number of the police department, and when they answered, I asked to speak to someone who had worked on the Jessica Martinez case. I didn't expect anything to come of it. I didn't expect them to take me seriously, but I had to try. Because I was starting to understand that Derek Watson was something far worse than a con artist or an abuser. I was starting to understand that he might be someone who had done this before. Someone who had hurt women before Sarah. Someone who might have killed before. I started searching Derek Watson's past with the patience of someone who had spent 25 years investigating crimes. And what I found made me realize that Sarah was not his first victim. She was just his most recent one. Derek had a history. It was subtle. It was carefully constructed. But once you knew what to look for, it was everywhere. I pulled up property records for Birmingham, Alabama. Derek Watson had lived there for 2 years, from 2014 to 2016. He had worked for a financial firm called Meridian Capital. I searched for his name in connection with that firm and found nothing. No news articles, no complaints, no scandals. But I did find something else. I found the name of another employee, someone who had worked there at the same time Derek had, Jessica Martinez. I searched for her obituary. It took me 20 minutes, but I found it. Jessica Martinez had died on March 15, 2021. She had been 26 years old. She had died in a single-vehicle car accident on the interstate near Birmingham. The obituary said she had swerved to avoid an animal in the road and had hit a guardrail. She had been alone in the car. She had died at the scene. I read her obituary 3 times. Then I searched for news articles about her death. There were 3 small articles in the local Birmingham newspaper. Young woman dies in highway accident. Investigation continues into mysterious crash. Family seeking answers in death of Jessica Martinez. The 3rd article was the most interesting. It mentioned that Jessica's family had questions about the circumstances of her death. It mentioned that Jessica had recently come into a significant inheritance. It mentioned that Jessica had been in a relationship with a man named Derek Watson, but that Derek had disappeared shortly after her death. The article said that police had investigated Derek as a person of interest, but that there had been insufficient evidence to pursue charges. My hands were shaking as I picked up my phone. I dialed information again and asked for the Birmingham Police Department. When someone answered, I asked for the detective who had worked the Jessica Martinez case. It took several transfers and several minutes of waiting. But finally, I was connected to Detective Robert Hayes. Detective Hayes, my name is Michael Patterson. I said, I'm calling about the Jessica Martinez case. I believe I may have information about the person who was involved in her death. There was a pause on the other end of the line. Mr. Patterson, that case is 3 years old. We closed it as an accidental death after our investigation was complete. Did you ever consider that it might not be an accident? I asked. We considered all possibilities, Detective Hayes said carefully. But the evidence pointed to an accident. There was no sign of foul play. There was no evidence of a struggle. The medical examiner concluded that she had died from blunt force trauma consistent with a car accident. What about Derek Watson? I asked. Did you investigate him? We did speak to Mr. Watson. He said he had no knowledge of how the accident occurred. He said he and Jessica had broken up the day before her death. He said he was at home when it happened. We had no evidence to contradict his statement. so we did not pursue charges. What if I told you that I have evidence that Derek Watson is a predator? What if I told you that he's done this before? What if I told you that he's doing it right now to my daughter? Detective Hayes's voice changed. It became more focused, more attentive. Mr. Patterson, where are you calling from? I'm in a different state, but I have surveillance equipment that Derek planted in my home. I have GPS trackers from my daughter's car. I have evidence of unauthorized access to my bank accounts. And I have information about at least one other woman that Derek may have targeted. That's very serious. Detective Hayes said, I'm going to need you to come to Alabama to make a formal statement, or I can have someone from our department call you to take a statement over the phone. I'm willing to do either, I said. But I need to know, did Jessica have an inheritance? Did she come into money? Another pause. Yes, Detective Hayes said quietly. Jessica's father had passed away 2 years before her death. She inherited about $450,000. The money was in her bank account. After her death, the funds were transferred to her mother. My stomach dropped. $450,000. Just like my bank account. Just like Derek had been trying to access my money through Sarah. Detective, I think Derek Watson killed Jessica Martinez, I said. And I think he's going to try to do the same thing to my daughter. That's a serious accusation. Detective Hayes said, Do you have evidence to support it? Not yet, but I'm working on it. And I think if you look at Derek's history, if you look at the other women he's been involved with, you're going to find a pattern. Jessica's brother has never stopped asking questions about her death, Detective Hayes said. His voice was different now. Harder, more resolved. He's been trying to get us to reopen the case for 3 years. Maybe it's time we listen to him. Mr. Patterson, do you know where Derek Watson is right now? He's with my daughter. He has her. Then we need to move fast. I'm going to call you back in 1 hour. I want you to have all of your evidence ready. Photographs of the surveillance equipment, documentation of the bank access, anything you have. Because if what you're saying is true, we need to act quickly. After I hung up with Detective Hayes, I sat in my kitchen and let the enormity of what I had just learned wash over me. Derek Watson was a killer. He wasn't just a con artist. He wasn't just an abuser. He was a predator who had learned how to hunt. He had learned how to select his victims. He had learned how to gain their trust. And he had learned how to eliminate them when they were no longer useful to him. And my daughter was his next target. I found Chris Martinez in a victims advocacy database. He had been looking for justice for his sister for 3 years. His contact information was listed there, an email, a phone number. I called him at midnight. When I introduced myself and explained why I was calling, he cried. You found evidence, Chris asked. His voice was thick with emotion. After all this time, someone finally found evidence. I found surveillance equipment in my house. I said, I found a GPS tracker on my daughter's car. I found unauthorized access to my bank accounts. And I found out that Derek did the same thing to your sister. He targeted her because she had money. He targeted her because she was alone. And when she wouldn't cooperate with him, he killed her. The police said it was an accident, Chris said bitterly. They said there was no evidence of foul play. They said Jessica swerved to avoid an animal, but I've never believed that. I've known in my heart that Derek had something to do with her death. I just could never prove it. I'm going to help you prove it, I said. But I need your help too. I need to know everything you know about Derek. I need to know every detail about Jessica's relationship with him. I can do better than that, Chris said. I can meet you. I can bring Jessica's files. I can bring everything I've gathered in the last 3 years. We agreed to meet at a coffee shop in the downtown area the next evening. I spent the entire day preparing. I printed out copies of all the surveillance equipment photographs. I printed out copies of the bank statements showing the unauthorized access. I printed out the GPS tracker information. I organized everything into a timeline. And then I waited. Chris arrived at the coffee shop at 7 o'clock in the evening. He was a man in his early 30s with dark hair and sad eyes. He had Jessica's features. I could see it immediately. He looked like the kind of person who had spent 3 years carrying unbearable grief. We sat in a corner booth away from other people. Chris pulled out a manila folder from his bag. Inside were photographs, newspaper articles, police reports, court documents, everything he had collected about Jessica's death. I've been investigating Derek on my own for 3 years, Chris said. But I'm not a detective. I don't have access to the resources that police have, so I've been limited in what I could find. But what I have found confirms that Derek is guilty. He showed me photographs of Jessica, a beautiful young woman with a bright smile. She looked happy in most of the pictures, but in the last few photographs, taken just weeks before her death, her smile seemed forced. Her eyes seemed hollow. Jessica changed when she met Derek. Chris said, she became quieter, more withdrawn. She stopped spending time with her friends. She became isolated. I tried to talk to her about it, but she said Derek was the one who understood her. Derek was the one who loved her. Derek was the one who wanted to build a future with her. Did she know about the inheritance, I asked. Not at first. But Derek found out. I don't know how. Maybe she told him. Maybe he looked through her financial records. But once he knew about the money, everything changed. He started talking about marriage. He started talking about moving together. He started making plans for their future. And then he started asking for access to her bank accounts. Chris showed me text messages between Jessica and Derek. Messages in which Derek was asking for details about her inheritance. Messages in which he was suggesting investments. Messages in which he was gradually isolating her from her family and friends. She should have left him, Chris said quietly. But by the time she realized what was happening, she was too deep. She was too in love with him. Or she thought she was. Or he had her convinced she had no way out. I said, just like he's trying to do with my daughter. Chris looked at me with an intensity that was almost frightening. He needs to be stopped. Mr. Patterson. He's going to keep doing this. He's going to keep targeting women until someone stops him. I know, I said. That's why we need to move fast. Before he kills someone else. Before he kills my daughter. I have something else to show you, Chris said. He pulled out another document. After Jessica died, I started looking into Derek's history, and I found something. He had tried to contact me online, on a dating app. He was trying to seduce me. He was trying to get close to me. Why, I asked. Because I had inherited some of Jessica's money. Because I was grieving and vulnerable. Because he thought he could manipulate me just like he had manipulated my sister. But something about him seemed off. His story kept changing. His details didn't add up. So I blocked him. I stared at Chris across the table. Here was a man who had lost his sister. A man who had spent 3 years seeking justice. A man who had been targeted himself by the same predator. and now he was looking at me with a determination that matched my own. "I need your help," I said. "I need you to help me build a case against Derek. I need you to help me gather evidence. I need you to help me make sure he never hurts anyone again." Chris reached across the table and grabbed my hand. "You're going to help me bring justice for my sister," he said. "We're in this together now, and we're not going to stop until Derek pays for what he's done, for the first time since this nightmare had begun." I wasn't alone, and that changed everything. That gave me a partner. That gave me someone who understood the stakes. That gave me someone who shared my anger and my determination. And as we sat there in that coffee shop, surrounded by the ordinary sounds of everyday life, I made a silent promise. Derek Watson was going to pay, not just for what he had done to Sarah, but for what he had done to Jessica, for what he had done to Chris, for what he had tried to do to me. He was going to pay with everything he had. I became a shadow in Derek's life. Every morning, I woke up and asked one question: what is he doing today? And I made sure I knew the answer before he went to sleep. Chris and I developed a system. We divided Derek's schedule into sections. I would follow him in the mornings. Chris would follow him in the afternoons. We communicated through text messages and encrypted phone calls. We documented everything. Derek's routine was remarkably consistent. He woke up at 6:30 every morning. He went to his office at 7:45. He worked until noon. Then he would leave the office and go somewhere else. At first, I didn't know where. But after 3 days of following him, I figured it out. He was going to meet with a lawyer, a man named Mark who worked in a small office downtown. I watched Derek meet with Mark 3 times in 1 week. They would sit in a conference room for about an hour. They would discuss documents. Mark would type things on his computer. Derek would look at what Mark had typed and nod. Then Derek would leave. On the 4th day, instead of going back to his office, Derek drove to a different location entirely. He drove about 30 minutes outside the city. He drove to a house I had never seen before. It was a modest 2-story house in a quiet neighborhood. The windows were covered with curtains or blinds. The driveway was empty except for Derek's car. I parked down the street and waited. I watched Derek go inside the house, and then I did something I shouldn't have done. I got out of my car and walked up to one of the windows. I looked through a crack in the curtains, and what I saw made my blood run cold. The house was furnished, but sparsely. There was a couch, a television, but everything else was bare. The walls were empty. There were no decorations, no photographs, no signs that anyone actually lived there. It looked like a house that had been prepared for people, a house that was being used for a specific purpose. I went back to my car and called Chris. "I found something," I said. "A house, I don't know what it is yet, but something is wrong about it." "I'm on my way," Chris said. While I waited for Chris, I did something else I shouldn't have done. I went to the property records office online. I searched for the address of the house, and what I found made me understand that Derek was even more careful than I had given him credit for. The house had been purchased 2 months ago. It had been purchased in the name of a company called Harrison Family Trust. The company had been established with a registered agent that Derek was listed as. The company had no other employees. The company had no other assets. The company existed for one reason, and one reason only, to purchase and maintain this house. Chris arrived 20 minutes later. We sat in my car and watched the house. We watched Derek leave after 2 hours, and then we sat there in silence, both of us understanding what we were looking at. This wasn't just a house. This was a base of operations. This was where Derek was conducting his business. Whatever business that was. We need to know who else is in there, Chris said quietly. As if on cue, a man came out of the house. He was in his late 30s, well-dressed, carrying a briefcase. He got into a car parked in front of the house and drove away. That was probably the lawyer. I said, "Mark, the one Derek meets with at his office. What are they doing in there?" Chris asked. "I don't know, but I'm going to find out." Over the next week, Chris and I kept detailed watch on the house. We documented every person who came and went. We took photographs. We wrote down the times. Derek visited the house every afternoon. Mark visited twice. Another man visited once. A man I didn't recognize who looked like he might be involved in construction or something similar. But what I really wanted to see was inside the house. What I really wanted to know was who else was in there. On the 8th day of surveillance, as Derek was leaving the house, I saw movement in one of the upstairs windows. A silhouette. A person. Someone who was looking out at the street below. And then I saw her face. Just for a moment. Just long enough to recognize her. It was Sarah. My daughter was in that house. My hands gripped the steering wheel so hard that my knuckles turned white. I wanted to go in there right then. I wanted to kick down the door and drag Sarah out of that place. I wanted to beat Derek to death with my bare hands. But I couldn't. Not yet. "Are you okay?" Chris asked. He had seen my face. He understood what I had just seen. "That's my daughter," I said. "She's in there." Then we moved fast. Chris said, "We get the evidence we need, and we bring Derek down." 2 days later, as the sun was setting, I saw another silhouette in a different window. This one was a woman I didn't recognize. She was younger than Sarah. She looked frightened. And as I watched, she reached up and touched the window, as if she was trying to reach something outside. Trying to reach help. Trying to reach freedom. I realized then that Derek wasn't hunting for just one victim. He was collecting them. He was building a collection of women, and I had no idea how many were in that house. I had no idea what he was doing to them, and I had no idea how much time we had before something terrible happened. The house was about 30 minutes outside the city, hidden behind trees, and inside, I could see the silhouettes of at least 2 women. That knowledge was driving me insane. I needed to know who that second woman was. I needed to know what Derek was doing with them. I needed to know what Mark the lawyer was helping him with. Chris and I spent the next 3 days conducting a deeper investigation into the house and everything connected to it. I went to the property records office in person and pulled the file on the Harrison Family Trust. The company had been formed with minimal information. There was a registered agent, but the registered agent was a company itself, a mail forwarding service that specialized in setting up shell companies. Derek's name didn't appear anywhere on the official paperwork. It was like he had covered his tracks expertly, like he had done this before, like he had studied how to hide. But then I found something else. The company had a business bank account. I paid a private investigator $200 to access the account information legally. The bank account had received several large deposits over the last 2 months. Each deposit was about $20,000. Each deposit came from a different source. Each source appeared to be a personal bank account belonging to a woman. I showed the information to Chris. We sat at a coffee shop downtown and went through the bank statements together, our heads bent over the papers, whispering so no one could hear us. "These are transfers," Chris said quietly, his voice trembling. "Derek is getting women to transfer money to this account, and then the account transfers it somewhere else. I said. I followed the trail of the money with my finger, tracing it through the banking system. After it arrived at the Harrison Family Trust account, it was transferred to another account, and then to another, and then to another. By the time I followed it to the end, the money had been moved through 5 different accounts in 3 different countries. It was money laundering, professional, careful, designed to hide the source and make it untraceable. He's not just stealing their money, Chris said, his jaw clenched. He's stealing their identity. He's making it impossible for them to recover. That's when I realized I needed to get inside that house. Not physically, but I needed to find out what was happening in there. I needed to know who that second woman was, and I needed to know it before Derek did something irreversible. On the 10th day of surveillance, I saw Mark arrive at the house again. He was carrying a leather folder and a laptop case. He stayed for 2 hours. When he left, I followed him back to his office in the financial district. I waited until he went inside the building, and then I did something that would have gotten me arrested if I had been caught. I broke into his car. The car was a 2019 BMW, pristine and expensive. The lock was simple for someone who had spent 25 years in law enforcement. I had it open in 30 seconds. I searched the car thoroughly, methodically, like I was conducting an official investigation. I found nothing in the glove compartment except the registration and insurance documents. I found nothing under the seats except some old coffee cups and a receipt from a restaurant. I was about to give up when I noticed something in the center console. A folder. A real folder. Not the one Mark had taken into the house, but another one entirely. I opened it carefully, my hands steady despite my racing heart. Inside were documents, photocopied documents, documents that made my blood run cold. They were death certificates, forged death certificates. Each one was for a different woman. Each one had a different name. Each one had a different date of death. But they all had the same signature at the bottom. The signature of a doctor who didn't exist. One of the death certificates was for Jessica Martinez. It had been backdated to match her actual death on March 15th, 2021. Derek had forged a death certificate for Jessica. Why, what purpose did that serve? Unless Jessica's death certificate was being used in some way. Unless Derek was using it for something. And then I understood. The death certificates weren't for the dead women. They were for the living women. Derek was creating false death certificates so he could declare them dead. He could tell their families that they had died. He could tell their banks that they had died. He could tell their employers that they had died. He could access their accounts and drain them. He could erase them from the world. And while everyone believed they were dead, Derek would be free to do whatever he wanted with them. I took photographs of the documents with my phone, my hands shaking as I held the camera steady. I carefully returned them to the folder. I carefully returned the folder to the console, and I closed the car door quietly, my mind reeling with the implications of what I had just discovered. I drove to meet Chris. We sat in his car in a parking lot overlooking the city, and I showed him the photographs. He looked at them for a long time without speaking, his face growing paler with each image. "He's going to do this to Sarah," Chris said finally, his voice barely above a whisper. "He's going to create a death certificate for her. He's going to declare her dead. If he hasn't already," I said. "For all I know, Sarah might already be dead to the world. Sarah might already be erased from every system. Sarah might already be gone." That's when I made a decision that would either save my daughter or destroy everything I was trying to build. I needed to know the status of Sarah's accounts. I needed to know if Derek had already started the process of erasing her, and there was only one way to find that out. I needed to call Sarah, from a number she wouldn't recognize, from a number that Derek couldn't trace, and I needed to ask her questions carefully enough that Derek wouldn't realize what I was doing. Sarah's voice was barely above a whisper when she told me, "There's another girl here. Daddy. Her name is Emma, and Derek is doing the same thing to her." Those words hit me like a punch to the stomach. Not just one victim. Two. Derek wasn't just focused on Sarah. He had another woman trapped in that house. He had another victim. I called the local police department the next morning. I didn't want to speak to Detective Morrison. I wanted someone fresh. I spoke to Detective Susan Chen. She had a sharp voice and the efficiency of someone who took her job seriously and didn't waste time with pleasantries. "I have information about a missing woman," I said. "I have evidence of a crime in progress, and I need your help immediately." "What's the woman's name?" Detective Chen asked. "I don't know her full name yet, but I have surveillance equipment from my home. I have GPS trackers. I have evidence of wire fraud and unauthorized bank access. And I have reason to believe this woman is being held against her will in a house outside the city." "Come to the station this afternoon," Detective Chen said. "Bring everything you have." I went to the police station at 2 o'clock in the afternoon. I brought the surveillance equipment, the GPS tracker, photographs of everything, and the bank statements showing unauthorized access. Detective Chen examined everything carefully, photographing each item and asking detailed questions about how I had obtained the documents and where I had found the surveillance devices. "This is significant," she said finally. "I'm going to check missing person reports from the last 6 months and see if we can identify this second woman you're talking about." It took 2 hours. Detective Chen sat at her desk with her partner, Detective James Rodriguez, going through missing person files systematically. Then Detective Chen looked up with an expression of intense focus. "I think I found her," she said. "Emma Chen, 24 years old, missing for 4 months. Her mother filed a report after Emma stopped responding to calls and texts. The mother said Emma had been acting strangely for the previous 6 months before she disappeared. She mentioned a man named Derek who had recently come into Emma's life. 4 months. Emma had been missing for 4 months. 4 months in that house. 4 months of isolation and God knows what else. "Tell me about Emma's background," I said. Detective Chen pulled up Emma's file on her computer and read through it carefully. Emma Chen, 24 years old. She worked as a financial analyst for a tech company downtown. No criminal record, no prior complaints. According to her mother's statement, Emma had been in a relationship with her boyfriend for about 6 months before she went missing. The mother expressed serious concern about how quickly the relationship had progressed. She said Emma had become withdrawn and secretive. "What about Emma's financial situation?" I asked. I knew from Jessica that this was the key. Derek targeted women with money. Detective Chen scrolled through the file. According to the mother's statement, Emma's grandmother had recently passed away. Emma was set to inherit approximately $500,000. The inheritance was being held in trust, pending Emma's 25th birthday. That birthday was 6 weeks away. 6 weeks. In 6 weeks. Emma would turn 25 and gain access to $500,000. And Derek needed to have everything in place before that happened. He needed the death certificate forged. He needed the account access set up. He needed to be ready to drain her accounts the moment the money became available. I looked at Detective Chen across her desk. This is exactly what he did to Jessica Martinez in Alabama. He targeted her because she had money coming to her. He isolated her from her family. He controlled her life. And when she was no longer useful to him, he killed her. "You're saying this Derek Watson is a serial killer?" Detective Chen asked. "I'm saying he's a predator who has learned how to hunt women with money. And I'm saying that Emma Chen and my daughter Sarah are running out of time. We'll need a warrant to search the house," Detective Chen said. "And we'll need to establish probable cause. Do you have anything that would give us that?" I thought about the death certificates I had found in Mark's car. I thought about the bank statements showing money transfers. I thought about the surveillance equipment. "I have enough," I said. "I have enough for probable cause." Detective Chen made a phone call to the district attorney's office. She explained the situation in careful, measured tones. She provided the evidence. After 30 minutes on the phone, she hung up and looked at me with determination. "The DA says we have enough for a warrant. We can search the house, but we need to move quickly. If Derek finds out we're investigating, he could run. And if he runs with those women..." She didn't finish the sentence. We both understood what would happen if Derek ran. "How long until you have the warrant?" I asked. "A few hours. Maybe less." I spent the next 2 hours with Detective Chen and Detective Rodriguez. I told them about Derek's history in Alabama. I told them about Jessica Martinez and how she had died. I told them about the pattern that connected all of Derek's victims. I told them about the surveillance equipment Derek had placed in my home. I told them about the fake death certificates I had found in Mark's car. And as I talked, I could see the understanding growing in their eyes. They understood that we weren't just dealing with a fraud case. We were dealing with a serial predator. At 4:30 in the afternoon, Detective Chen received a call. The warrant had been approved. The judge had signed off. We had authorization to search the house and arrest Derek Watson on suspicion of kidnapping, fraud, and attempted murder. "We're going in at 6 in the morning," Detective Chen said. "I want you to stay away from the house. I don't want you anywhere near it when we execute the warrant. Is that understood?" "Understood," I said, but as I left the police station, I knew I wouldn't be able to stay away. Sarah was in that house, and I wasn't going to let her spend one more night there. That night, I watched Derek's house knowing that inside, a man was preparing to commit murder, and I was going to let him for one more night, because we needed to catch him in the act. I parked my car down the street, hidden behind some trees. I had a view of the front and side of the house. I had my phone. I had my patience. And I had a burning need to see Derek pay for what he had done. At 8 o'clock in the evening, I saw Mark arrive at the house. He was carrying a briefcase and a laptop case. He walked straight to the door and went inside. Through the window, I could see shadows moving inside. I could see Derek and Mark sitting at a table in what looked like the living room. They were looking at documents. Mark was pointing at something on the laptop screen. They seemed to be in a serious discussion. I had placed a listening device outside the house earlier that day. It was small and wireless, hidden in the flower pot near the front door. The audio came through to my phone clearly. I pressed the earpiece in and listened carefully to their conversation. "The cops are getting close," Mark said. His voice was tense, worried. I could hear the stress in every syllable. "I can feel it. We need to move her tomorrow. We need to finalize the paperwork tonight before it's too late. Emma's mother will never see her alive again if someone doesn't pay," Derek said. His voice was calm, casual, like he was discussing the weather instead of a woman's life and death. She has until tomorrow at noon. After that, we're done with Emma. She becomes another accident, another tragedy. My hands clenched into fists so hard that my fingernails cut into my palms. Done with Emma. That phrase, that casual statement about a human being's existence like she was an object, like she was a thing to be used and then discarded. Then I saw movement in another window. Sarah. She was trying to get closer to the window. She was trying to look outside, trying to see if there was any help coming. And then I saw Derek stand up abruptly. He walked toward Sarah with purpose. And before I could even process what was happening, I saw him hit her. His hand connected with her face. Sarah fell backward into the wall. I started the car. I was going to go in there right then. I was going to kill him with my bare hands. I didn't care about the warrant. I didn't care about the trial. I only cared about stopping him from hurting my daughter again. But then my phone rang. It was Detective Chen. "Stay in your car," she said. Her voice was steel. Her tone was absolute. "Do not move. Do not interfere. We have units surrounding the house. If you go in there now, you will compromise the entire operation, and he could walk free on a technicality." Understood. "He just hit Sarah," I said. My voice was shaking with rage. "He just hit my daughter." "I know," Detective Chen said. "We're watching. We're recording everything. We have it all. But we need him to do one more thing. We need him to make a move that will guarantee a conviction that will stick. Stay calm. Stay in your car. Trust me." I watched Derek leave the room. I watched Mark continue typing on the laptop, his fingers moving quickly across the keyboard. And then I saw Derek come back into the visible area. He was dragging Emma by her arm. She was screaming. She was fighting. She was resisting with everything she had. And Derek was holding a piece of paper in his hand. A death certificate. It had to be, "Sign it," Derek said. His voice came through the listening device, crystal clear and absolutely cold. "No," Emma said. Her voice was defiant even through her fear. "I won't. You can kill me, but I won't sign anything." "Sign it," Derek said again. And this time, I heard the sound of impact. Physical violence. Emma screamed. Sarah screamed in response, trying to protect her. The sound of their terror came through my earpiece. "We're going to move now," Detective Chen said on the phone. "Full tactical team. We have everything we need. Are you ready?" "Are you sure?" I asked. "What if he kills them before you get there?" "He won't," Detective Chen said with a confidence I wasn't sure she felt. "He needs them alive for his plan to work. But we need to move now, before he destroys the evidence or does something we can't prosecute." I hung up the phone. I watched the house. I waited for what felt like an eternity, but was probably only a few minutes. And then I saw them. Police cars coming from every direction. Tactical teams in full gear surrounding the house from all sides. Officers with weapons drawn positioning themselves at every entrance. The front door was breached with a battering ram. Officers poured in. I heard shouting. I heard Derek screaming profanities. I heard Emma crying. And then, after what felt like forever, I saw them being led out. Sarah and Emma, both alive, both being led out of the house by police officers wearing protective gear. Sarah was looking for me. Her eyes were scanning the street, and when she saw my car, she broke away from the officer and ran toward me. I got out of the car. I ran toward her, and I held my daughter in my arms for the first time in what felt like years, but had only been days. It's okay. I said, it's okay. It's over. It's all over. But as I held Sarah, I knew something important. The arrest was just the beginning. There would be a trial. There would be testimony. There would be a long, painful process of healing ahead. But at least Sarah was alive. At least Emma was alive, at 6 in the morning. I walked into the district attorney's office with a folder that contained 3 lives: Jessica's, Sarah's, and Emma's. And I was about to make sure Derek paid for all 3. The folder was thick and heavy. It contained everything I had gathered over the past week. Everything that would destroy Derek Watson completely. The district attorney's name was Robert Harrison. He was a man in his late 50s with gray hair and the bearing of someone who had spent his entire career fighting for justice. He sat across from me at his desk and began examining the contents of the folder methodically, his eyes moving carefully across each document. "Walk me through this," he said. "Start from the beginning. I want to understand everything." I told him everything. I told him about Derek calling me to tell me I was dead. I told him about the surveillance equipment I had found hidden throughout my house. I told him about the GPS tracker attached to Sarah's car. I told him about the forged death certificates I had found in Mark's car. I told him about Jessica Martinez in Alabama and how she had died in a suspicious car accident 3 years ago. I told him about Emma Chen and how she had been missing for 4 months. I told him about the bank accounts and the money transfers and the identity theft scheme. As I talked, D.A. Harrison made detailed notes. He asked probing questions. He wanted to understand the scope of Derek's crimes. He wanted to understand the pattern that connected all of the victims. He wanted to understand how Derek thought. And when I finished, he sat back in his chair and looked at me with an expression of grim determination and barely contained anger. "This is comprehensive," he said finally. "You've built a case that would take our office months to construct, and you did it in less than a week. This is exceptional work, Mr. Patterson." "What are you going to charge him with?" I asked. "DA." Harrison opened his laptop and began typing slowly, reading each charge aloud as he entered it. "Let's see. We have premeditated murder in the case of Jessica Martinez. We have kidnapping in the cases of Sarah Patterson and Emma Chen. We have human trafficking. We have wire fraud across multiple states. We have unauthorized access to bank accounts and financial systems. We have forgery of official documents. We have battery and assault. We have attempted murder. We have identity theft and fraud. We have conspiracy. The list goes on and on." "What about the other women?" I asked. "What about the other women whose bank accounts he accessed? What about the other victims that we don't even know about yet? We'll get them," D.A. Harrison said with absolute certainty. "Once we have Derek convicted on these charges, once we have him sentenced and in prison, we can investigate the others. We can interview them. We can find them. We can make sure Derek faces justice for everything he's done. But first, we need to secure convictions for these 3 cases. These are the strongest cases we have. These are the ones we can prove beyond any shadow of a doubt." "How long will the trial take?" I asked. "That depends on Derek's lawyer and how much he wants to fight. But with evidence like this, with surveillance footage and bank records and forged documents, with living witnesses who can testify about what Derek did to them, I don't think Derek will have much of a defense. I think we're going to win this case, Mr. Patterson. And I think Derek Watson is going to spend the rest of his life in prison. I'm going to make sure of it." I felt something release in my chest, something I had been holding on to for days, a tension that I hadn't even realized was there, weighing me down. Derek was going to pay. The system was going to work. Justice was going to happen. There's one more thing. I said. I pulled out a piece of paper from the folder. It was a photograph of one of the forged death certificates. This is Mark Stillwell. He's the lawyer who helped Derek forge the death certificates. He's the one who created the legal documents that would have allowed Derek to drain the accounts and erase his victims from existence. He's complicit in all of this. D.A. Harrison looked at the photograph. His expression hardened into something cold and unforgiving. We'll arrest him too, D.A. Harrison said with absolute conviction. We'll charge him with conspiracy to commit murder, conspiracy to commit fraud, money laundering, and accessory after the fact. Mr. Patterson, do you understand what you've accomplished here? Do you really understand? I saved my daughter. I said, you did more than that. D.A., Harrison said. You stopped a serial killer. You gathered evidence that will put him away for the rest of his life. You gave justice to a woman in Alabama who died 3 years ago believing she was alone. You saved 2 women from being murdered and having their identities stolen. You potentially saved other women we haven't found yet. You're a hero. Mr. Patterson. And I'm going to make sure the courts recognize that. I didn't feel like a hero. I felt tired. I felt angry at what Derek had done. I felt relieved that Sarah and Emma were safe. But I didn't feel like a hero. When will Derek go to trial, I asked. We'll arraign him tomorrow morning. The judge will set bail. But given the severity of the charges, I'm going to argue against bail. I'm going to argue that Derek is a flight risk and a danger to the community. And I think the judge will agree with me. Derek Watson is not going to see freedom again. Mr. Patterson, I promise you that. As I left the district attorney's office, I felt the weight of the past week finally lift from my shoulders. Derek was in custody. Sarah and Emma were safe. The evidence was in the hands of professionals who would know how to use it. And now, finally, I could focus on what mattered. I could focus on helping Sarah recover. I could focus on being the father she needed. But as I walked to my car, I thought about Jessica Martinez. I thought about her mother, who had spent 3 years wondering what had happened to her daughter. And I made a silent promise. Derek was going to pay. For Jessica. For Sarah. For Emma. For all of his victims. At 7 in the morning, 20 officers in tactical gear surrounded the house, and I was watching from across the street, finally holding my breath. Detective Chen had warned me to stay back, to stay out of the way of the operation. I had promised I would, but I couldn't stay away completely. I needed to see this. I needed to watch Derek taken into custody. The police used a battering ram on the front door. The sound of it breaking open echoed through the quiet morning air, violent and final. Officers poured into the house immediately, their weapons drawn, their voices shouting commands and warnings. I heard shouting coming from inside the house. I heard Derek's voice screaming profanities at the officers. I heard the sound of things being overturned as officers moved through the rooms, searching every corner for evidence and potential threats. The first sign of Derek was his hands, bound in handcuffs, appearing in the doorway. Then his body emerged into the morning light. 2 officers in full tactical gear held his arms, guiding him forward. He was walking calmly, his face was composed. His expression was blank and emotionless. It was like he was completely disconnected from what was happening around him. He didn't struggle against the officers. He didn't resist. He didn't protest his innocence. He just walked, his head up, his eyes forward, looking at nothing and no one, like this moment meant nothing to him. 5 minutes later, Mark was let out of the house. But Mark was completely different from Derek. Mark was fighting against the officers who held him. Mark was struggling and thrashing. Mark was screaming that he had been coerced. Mark was claiming that Derek had forced him to help with everything. Mark was trying to negotiate, trying to make deals, trying to separate himself from Derek's crimes. But nobody was listening to him. Nobody believed his excuses. The evidence showed his complicity. Then Sarah came out. An officer had his hand on her elbow, guiding her gently down the steps. She looked dazed and disoriented. She looked deeply traumatized by what she had endured. She looked like she wasn't entirely sure what was happening or if it was actually real. And then her eyes found me across the street. For a long moment, she just stared, unable to process that I was there. And then recognition hit her. She broke free from the officer's gentle grip and ran toward me. I caught her as she threw herself into my arms with the force of someone who had given up hope of ever being rescued. She was crying uncontrollably. She was shaking from emotional and physical exhaustion. She was saying my name over and over again like it was a prayer. And I was holding her tightly, telling her that everything was going to be okay, telling her that Derek could never hurt her again, telling her that I was there and I would never let her go. "Dad," she said, her voice breaking with emotion. "Dad, I was so scared. I thought he was going to kill me." "I know, baby. I know you were scared. But it's over now. It's all over. You're safe." Emma came out next, leaning heavily on 2 paramedics. She was limping as she moved toward the ambulance. She was holding her left arm carefully against her body, as if the slightest movement would cause her pain. She looked worse off than Sarah. She looked like she had endured the worst of Derek's violence. Her face was bruised. Her clothes were torn. The paramedics loaded her into the ambulance with practiced efficiency. One of them looked at me briefly with an expression that told me Emma had serious injuries. Emma had been beaten severely. Emma had been on the brink of something terrible when the police broke down that door. Officers were continuously coming out of the house, carrying evidence boxes and bags. They had the surveillance equipment that Derek had used to control his victims. They had the computers that contained his records. They had the documents that proved his crimes. They had everything. Complete evidence of Derek's depravity. Evidence that would guarantee his conviction and imprisonment. And then Derek appeared again at the front door, being led by 2 officers toward a waiting police car. He was still calm. He was still emotionless. He was still acting like none of this was real or significant. The officer opened the rear door of the police car. Derek bent down to get inside, and then he paused. He looked back. He looked directly at me across the street, making eye contact. And he smiled. It wasn't a smile of regret or fear. It wasn't a smile of someone facing justice. It was a smile that communicated that he didn't care about any of this. It was a smile that suggested he had genuinely enjoyed what he had done. It was a smile that indicated some delusional part of him believed he would somehow escape punishment. It was the smile of a man who was fundamentally incapable of feeling empathy or remorse for anything. "Did you see that?" Sarah asked. She had witnessed Derek smile at me from across the street. "Yes," I said. "I saw it." "What does it mean?" Sarah asked, her voice small and frightened. "It means we're going to make sure he never smiles again," I said with absolute conviction. "It means we're going to make sure he spends every single day for the rest of his life in a prison cell. thinking about what he did to you and to Emma and to Jessica. It means justice is coming for him. The police car pulled away from the house slowly. Derek was inside, handcuffed and finally behind bars, and as I watched him disappear down the street, I felt something shift inside me. The rage that had been driving me forward for the past week began to transform into something different. It became purpose. It became determination. It became the knowledge that Derek would face justice in a courtroom. "Come on," I said to Sarah gently. "Let's get you to the hospital. Let's get you checked out medically. Let's make sure you're healthy and okay." "I just want to go home," Sarah said, her voice exhausted. "I know, baby. But first, we need to make sure you're physically healthy. Then we'll go home, and then we'll start healing. Together. As a family." The trial lasted 6 weeks. 6 weeks of testimony, evidence, and confrontation with the man who had tried to erase my daughter's future. And I made sure he knew I was watching every second. I sat in the courtroom every single day. I never missed a moment. I wanted Derek to see my face. I wanted him to understand that someone was bearing witness to his crimes. Sarah testified on the first day. She walked to the witness stand with her shoulders back and her head held high, but I could see her hands trembling as she placed them on the table. The prosecutor asked her to describe her relationship with Derek. Sarah's voice was steady as she talked about how charming he had been initially, how he had systematically isolated her from her friends and family, how he had monitored her phone and controlled her money. And then she talked about the violence. "He hit me," Sarah said, her voice barely above a whisper, but clear enough for everyone in the courtroom to hear. "He said he was teaching me to control my emotions. He said it was for my own good. But it wasn't. It was abuse." When she talked about the forced abortion, Sarah's voice broke completely. The prosecutor handed her tissues and waited patiently. The judge allowed her time to compose herself. Sarah took several deep breaths and continued, telling the courtroom about the procedure, about the physical pain, about the emotional devastation, about the way Derek had acted like the entire thing meant absolutely nothing to him. Emma testified next. She was noticeably thinner than when I had last seen her, pale from her time in the hospital recovering from her serious injuries. She described 4 months of captivity in detail. She described being beaten repeatedly. She described being locked in a small room. She described the fear that Derek would eventually kill her. When the prosecutor asked her why she didn't try to escape, Emma simply said, "Because I believed he would kill me if I tried." I still believe that. Chris testified about his sister Jessica with tears in his eyes. He brought photographs of Jessica at family gatherings, smiling and vibrant. He described her bright personality and her dreams for the future. He described the dramatic change in her after meeting Derek. He described the day the police came to his mother's house to tell them about the car accident. And he described how he had spent 3 long years trying to convince the police that her death was not an accident. "I knew," Chris said with absolute certainty. "I knew in my heart that Derek had something to do with her death. I couldn't prove it at the time. But I never stopped looking for justice for my sister. And now, finally, I can tell her that justice is coming." I testified about the surveillance equipment I had found. I testified about the GPS tracker hidden under Sarah's car. I testified about the unauthorized access to bank accounts. I showed the courtroom detailed photographs of each device I had discovered. I explained how Derek had built a comprehensive, sophisticated system of control over his victims. The prosecutor asked me about my decision to investigate Derek independently before calling the police. I was a cop for 25 years. I said, I understood the system. I knew it could be slow. I knew Derek could run. I knew Sarah could be in danger. So I did what I had to do to protect my daughter and to gather evidence that would guarantee his conviction. Derek's lawyer tried to discredit my testimony. He asked if I had broken any laws in obtaining evidence. I admitted that I had broken into Mark's car, but the judge ruled that the evidence was admissible because I had immediately turned it over to authorities and because it clearly indicated serious crimes. Mark testified and attempted to minimize his role in everything. He claimed that Derek had coerced him into helping. He claimed that Derek had threatened him repeatedly. He claimed that he was merely following Derek's orders under duress. But his own testimony contradicted his defense. He admitted to forging the death certificates himself. He admitted to helping Derek set up the shell companies. He admitted to understanding that the money was being stolen from vulnerable women. I knew it was wrong, Mark said, his voice hollow. But I was scared of Derek. He's not a normal person. He doesn't have any human feelings. He's completely incapable of empathy or remorse. Derek's lawyer presented a defense based on reasonable doubt and circumstantial evidence. He argued that the surveillance equipment could have been placed there by someone else. He argued that the GPS tracker could have been installed by a different person. He argued that Derek had been framed by people with a personal vendetta. But the evidence was absolutely overwhelming. The jury clearly didn't believe any of it. Derek himself chose not to testify. He sat at the defense table with his lawyer and said absolutely nothing. The judge asked him directly if he had anything to say in his own defense. Derek simply said one word in a flat, emotionless tone. No. That single word told the entire courtroom everything they needed to know about Derek Watson. He didn't deny the charges. He didn't express any remorse. He didn't try to explain or defend himself. He just sat there, emotionless and cold, completely indifferent to the lives he had destroyed. The prosecution gave their closing argument. D.A. Harrison walked the jury methodically through each piece of evidence. He showed them the surveillance equipment. He showed them the GPS data. He showed them the forged documents. He showed them the bank statements. He showed them the photographs of Jessica, Sarah, and Emma. And then he asked the jury one simple but powerful question. Is there any doubt in your minds that Derek Watson is guilty of these charges? Is there any reasonable doubt at all? The jury deliberated for 2 hours. 2 hours. And then they came back into the courtroom. The judge asked for their verdict. And the forewoman stood up and said the words I had been waiting to hear since this nightmare began. We find the defendant guilty on all counts. The judge looked at Derek and pronounced the words I had been praying to hear. Guilty on all counts. The courtroom erupted in emotion. Sarah grabbed my hand and squeezed it so hard that it hurt, but I didn't care. Emma closed her eyes and took a deep, shaking breath, like she had been holding her breath for 6 weeks. Chris put his head in his hands and began to cry. And I sat there, feeling the weight of the past 6 weeks finally begin to lift from my shoulders. The sentencing hearing took place 2 weeks later. The judge listened carefully to victim impact statements from each person Derek had harmed. Sarah spoke about how Derek's actions had fundamentally changed her life. She spoke about the trust issues she now had. She spoke about the nightmares she still experienced. She spoke about the therapy she would need for years to come. Her voice was quiet but steady as she described the emotional and physical trauma she had endured. Emma spoke about the nightmares that still haunted her in the middle of the night. She spoke about her injuries and the physical pain that remained. She spoke about the days she spent in the hospital recovering. She spoke about her mother's grief and fear. She spoke about how she would spend the rest of her life dealing with the consequences of 4 months of captivity and abuse. Chris spoke about his sister Jessica with tears streaming down his face. He spoke about the 3 years he had spent wondering what happened to her. He spoke about the day he learned that Derek might be responsible for her death. He spoke about his mother's grief, which had never fully healed. He spoke about the justice that Jessica finally deserved. And then I spoke. I stood up and addressed the court directly. "Your Honor," I said, my voice steady but filled with emotion. "I spent 25 years as a police officer. I have seen many criminals throughout my career, but I have never encountered anyone as cold and calculating as Derek Mason. He didn't target my daughter randomly. He targeted her because she was vulnerable. He targeted her because she had access to money. He systematically isolated her from everyone who loved her. He monitored her. He controlled her. And then he abused her. He did this exact same thing to Jessica Martinez in Alabama 3 years ago. He did this to Emma Chen, and he would have done it to other women if he hadn't been stopped. Derek Mason is a predator. He is a serial predator, and he deserves the harshest punishment the law allows." The judge listened to every word, making detailed notes as I spoke. When I finished, the judge looked directly at Derek with an expression of absolute disgust. "Mr. Mason, this court has carefully reviewed all the evidence presented during this trial, and I must say that I have rarely encountered such a comprehensive case of predatory behavior. This court has found you guilty of premeditated murder in the death of Jessica Martinez. This court has found you guilty of kidnapping Sarah Patterson and Emma Chen. This court has found you guilty of human trafficking. This court has found you guilty of wire fraud across multiple states. This court has found you guilty of battery and assault. This court has found you guilty of attempted murder in the case of Emma Chen. And this court has found you guilty of identity theft and fraud." The judge paused, letting the weight of those convictions settle over the entire courtroom. "You have shown absolutely no remorse for your actions. You have shown no understanding of the harm you have caused to these women and their families. You are a predator who has learned how to hunt vulnerable women. You have systematically manipulated them, isolated them, abused them, and stolen from them. This is one of the most egregious and disturbing cases of predatory behavior that I have encountered in my 20 years serving on this bench." The judge picked up a document from the bench and began reading the official sentencing. "I sentence you, Derek Mason, to 25 years to life in the state penitentiary. You will be eligible for parole after serving 25 years, but given the severity and nature of your crimes, I would be shocked if you are ever released from incarceration. You will spend the rest of your natural life in prison for the horrific crimes you have committed against these innocent women." Derek didn't react. He didn't show any emotion at all. He didn't show surprise or fear or regret or anger. He just stood there, blank-faced and cold, completely indifferent to the sentence that had just been handed down. As the bailiffs led him away from the courtroom in handcuffs, he turned and looked at me one final time. The same cold stare, the same empty expression, and I understood in that moment that Derek would never change. He would spend 25 years to life in prison, and he would never understand why he deserved it. He would never feel remorse. He would never become a better person. Sarah was crying, but they were tears of relief and some measure of closure. Emma was actually smiling for the first time since I had known her. Chris was standing, shaking the hand of D.A. Harrison with gratitude, and the judge made one final statement before leaving the bench. "This court commends the investigative work of Michael Patterson, whose dedication and diligence brought this predator to justice. Without Mr. Patterson's efforts and courage, Derek Mason would have continued preying on vulnerable women. Your work, Mr. Patterson, has saved lives and has brought justice to those who have suffered. I nodded, accepting the judge's words and acknowledging their significance. But I didn't feel like a hero. I felt like a father who had protected his daughter. I felt like a man who had done what was necessary to stop someone from hurting the people he loved most. As I walked out of the courtroom with Sarah holding my hand, I realized something important. I didn't get my money back. That was gone forever. I didn't get my old life back. The life I had before Derek came into our world was gone. But I got something more valuable. I got my daughter back. And that was worth everything. 6 months later, I watched my daughter laugh for the first time since this nightmare began. It was a small laugh, quiet and tentative, but it was absolutely real. And that's when I knew we were going to be okay. Not that everything was fixed, not that the trauma had completely disappeared, but that genuine healing was actually happening. One day at a time. Michael, Sarah, Emma, and Chris had become a strange kind of family. We gathered at my house every Sunday evening without fail. At first, those gatherings were awkward and painful. Nobody knew what to say. The silence was heavy with the weight of shared trauma and shared suffering. But over time, something shifted. We stopped being strangers connected only by tragedy. We became people who were genuinely healing together. Sarah's crippling fear began to diminish, slowly and unevenly. There were days when she felt okay. There were good days when she could leave the house without panic. But there were also dark days when she woke up in the middle of the night from nightmares about Derek's face. There were days when anxiety overwhelmed her so completely that she couldn't leave her bedroom. But alongside those difficult days, there were increasingly more good days. Days when she laughed. Days when she seemed almost like herself again. Emma had started going back to school with determined effort. She was taking classes online at first, terrified of being around other people in large groups. But gradually, week by week, she gained confidence and courage. She completed her therapy sessions. Her physical injuries healed completely. Her emotional wounds, while still raw and tender, began to close and scar. She talked about finishing her degree. She talked about going to graduate school. She talked about a future that Derek had tried so hard to steal from her. "I'm going to finish college," Emma said one evening as we sat around my dining room table eating dinner. "Derek took 4 years from me, but he's not going to take my entire future." Chris had become like a brother to me. We had bonded initially over our shared desire to see Derek punished for his crimes. But now we bonded over something much deeper and more meaningful. We bonded over our grief for Jessica. We bonded over our anger at the system that had failed her for 3 years. We bonded over our determination to make sure Derek's name would be remembered as a warning to others, not as a success story. Sarah and Emma supported each other in ways that I could never support them. They understood what each other had endured. They didn't need detailed explanations or convincing that what had happened was real and serious. They had lived it. They carried it with them every day. And together, they were stronger than either of them could have been alone. My own anger was gradually transforming into something different. I had spent months burning with white-hot rage. That rage had driven me to investigate Derek. That rage had driven me to gather evidence. That rage had driven me to testify in court with absolute conviction. But now, sitting with Sarah and Emma and Chris every Sunday, I began to understand that I needed to let some of that rage go. Not forgive Derek, I would never forgive Derek. But stop letting his crimes completely consume me the way they were consuming my daughter. Every week, Sarah went to therapy with a dedicated therapist. Every week, Emma went to therapy to process her trauma. And every week, I went to therapy as well. We were all learning how to process what had happened to us. We were all learning how to move forward with our lives. We were all learning that healing wasn't a single destination. It was a long, difficult, non-linear process that would continue for years. One evening, Sarah said something that broke my heart all over again, but in a way that made me understand her pain more deeply. I don't know who I am anymore. Dad, she said quietly, her voice barely above a whisper. Derek stole that from me. He stole my sense of self. He stole my confidence. I don't know how to be myself without being absolutely terrified. I reached across the table and took her hand in mine, squeezing it gently. Then we'll find out who you are together, I said with absolute certainty. We'll figure it out one day at a time, one moment at a time, and I'll be here with you every single step of the way. I promise you that. Emma listened to this exchange, and tears began to roll slowly down her face. Not tears of sadness, but tears of deep recognition and understanding. She knew exactly what Sarah meant because she lived it too. Derek had stolen pieces of both of them. I'm going to finish college, Emma said again, her voice noticeably stronger and more determined. And I'm going to become a therapist. I'm going to help other women who have been through exactly what we've been through. Derek took 4 years from me, but he's absolutely not going to take my purpose or my future. We sat around that table, the 4 of us, and we cried together. We held each other. We talked about Jessica, who couldn't be there with us but whose memory lived in every conversation we had. We talked about the future and what it might hold. We talked about hope and the possibility of healing. And I realized something profoundly important that night. Healing isn't linear. It doesn't go in one straight direction. It goes forward and backward and sideways. Some days are good and full of progress. Some days are terrible and full of setbacks. But it's happening. It's genuinely happening. Sarah is healing. Emma is healing. Chris is finding peace. And I am learning to live with what happened instead of being consumed by it completely. Derek is in prison serving 25 years to life. He's where he belongs. He's exactly where he deserves to be. And now we get to live our lives. We get to rebuild from the ruins of what he destroyed. We get to become new versions of ourselves, stronger and more resilient. And the most valuable thing I learned through all of this is that the most valuable things in life can't be stolen. Family can't be stolen. Love can't be stolen. The will to survive can't be stolen. These things, Derek could never touch. People often ask me, don't you regret fighting back? Don't you wish you just let him take everything and disappear? Don't you regret all the pain your family went through during the trial? My answer is always the same. No. I don't regret any of it. Because what I recovered was worth infinitely more than any amount of money could ever be. What I recovered was my daughter's life and her future. What I recovered was justice for a woman in Alabama who died believing she was completely alone. What I recovered was hope for everyone. I didn't get my money back. Derek's crimes cost me more than $200,000 in stolen assets and lost investments. That money is gone forever. That's part of the price I paid for saving my daughter's life. I didn't get my old life back either. The life I had before Derek came into our world is gone and can never be recovered. But I got something far more valuable than money or nostalgia for the past. I got Sarah back alive and safe. I got Emma's freedom and her future. I got justice for Jessica Martinez. And I got the knowledge that my actions mattered, that I made a real difference in people's lives. To anyone listening to this story right now, I want to say something profoundly important. If someone is manipulating you, preying on you, controlling you, monitoring you, isolating you from the people you love most, please ask for help immediately. Please don't wait another day. Please don't convince yourself that it will get better, or that you're overreacting, or that you deserve what's happening. It took my family until it was almost too late. Sarah almost died in that house. Emma almost died. Jessica did die. Don't wait until it's too late for you or someone you love. Derek thought I was just a broken old man living alone on a cop's pension. He looked at my struggles and my loneliness and thought I was easy prey to manipulate. He thought I would panic and give him everything without question. He was completely wrong about me. And if you're listening to this right now, I want you to know something important. It's never too late to fight back. You might be scared. You might feel completely alone. You might think there's no way out of your situation, but there is always a way out. And you are stronger than you think you are. Sarah is thriving now in ways I never thought possible. She's back in school finishing the degree that Derek stole from her. She's doing meaningful volunteer work helping other survivors of domestic abuse and violence. She's rebuilding her life piece by piece, day by day, moment by moment. She's not who she was before Derek, but she's becoming someone stronger, someone who understands suffering in deep ways that will help her help others. She's turned her pain into purpose and meaning. Emma is back at university pursuing her degree in psychology with determination and hope. She's going to graduate school to become a therapist, specializing in trauma recovery and healing. She's taking her suffering and transforming it into something meaningful and powerful. Derek tried to erase her from existence, but instead, she's going to dedicate her life to helping people that he could never touch again. Chris and I still meet every week without fail. We still talk about Jessica and what she meant to all of us. We talk about justice and loss and the unfairness of a system that almost let Derek escape prosecution. But we also talk about hope and healing. We talk about the fact that Jessica's death led directly to Derek's conviction, that her memory is keeping other women safe from a predator. Derek took 3 years from my daughter, 4 years from Emma, 6 years from Jessica. 3 young women whose lives were interrupted or ended by his cruelty and greed. But he couldn't take our spirits. He couldn't take our love for each other. He couldn't destroy the will to survive that lives inside each of us. To anyone watching this who is trapped in a situation like Sarah and Emma were trapped, you are not alone. There are people who care about you. There are people who will fight for you. There are people who will believe you completely. Please reach out today. Please ask for help. Please don't give up on yourself. To anyone who suspects that someone they love is being hurt, trust your instincts. If something feels wrong, it probably is. Don't wait for absolute proof. Trust yourself and report it today. Get help. Do something. To anyone who has survived abuse of any kind, you are a warrior. You are a survivor. You are stronger than the person who hurt you. Your story matters. Your voice matters. Your healing matters. And to Derek Mason, I hope you know this truth. Love was stronger than your evil, and it always will be. You tried to destroy my family, but you failed because love is stronger than cruelty. This is my story. This is Sarah's story. This is Emma's story. This is Chris's story. This is Jessica's story, and Derek Mason's name will be remembered not as a successful predator, but as a cautionary tale and a warning. A reminder that justice comes from those who refuse to stay silent. A reminder that one person can make a difference. My name is Michael Patterson, and this is the story of how love defeated evil. This is the story of how a father protected his daughter. This is the story of how survivors became warriors. Derek is in prison serving 25 years to life. He will spend the rest of his life there. And Sarah, Emma, Chris, and I are free. We are healing. We are thriving. We will never stop telling this story because every time we tell it, someone hears it and understands they're not alone. This is the story of how love defeated evil. Remember that. Always.